Silence. All stand. Please be seated.
Yes, Ms. Vance.
Thank you, Your Honour. Brother Peter Clinch is in the witness box.
Brother,
and, he needs...
Yes, would you take an oath on the Bible? Yes. Would you take the Bible in your hand and repeat after me, please? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission.
The evidence I shall give at this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take a seat, please.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Vance.
Thank you. Your full name for the Royal Commission, your full name?
Peter Bernard Clinch.
And your occupation?
I'm a qualified teacher and Christian brother.
You've made a statement dated the 12th of May 2015. The contents of that statement are true and correct?
Yes, they are.
And
So we're coming to the 2827.
now, I understand from your statement that you, since the 25th of July last year, have held the position of Province Leader of the Christian Brothers Oceania Province.
Correct.
What does the Oceania Province comprise?
The Oceania Province is the countries of Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste and the Philippines.
How many brothers operate in the province that you head?
There are approximately 358 brothers.
Has that decreased over time?
Certainly has. And we only had a death of a brother yesterday, and the age profile is high, and in my term of office I would expect maybe fewer than another 50 to have died.
And what is your term of office?
I have a 6-year appointment, and that will conclude in 2020.
How were you appointed?
Sorry?
How were you appointed to the position?
Yes, I am appointed. It's not an election. I'm appointed by the congregation leader, and that congregation leader is in Rome. Currently, it's a Canadian brother by the name of Hugh O'Neill. My name was forwarded by our province has an Oceania province gathering, we call a chapter, and names are raised at that chapter, and then the brothers vote, and they are sealed, private confidentiality, and are sent to Rome, and then Rome appoints.
So was it the case that your province only put forward one name, which was yours?
No, I don't know what happened really. So,
you didn't vote?
Sorry?
You didn't participate in the process? Which
Oh, yes, yes. Well, I can explain a bit, might help to explain the process. In March of last year, 2014, we had a congregation chapter in Nairobi. That's a worldwide meeting conference. And Oceania Province, because of our numbers, could have 10 representatives at that meeting. So there was a vote from our brothers across Oceania, and I was one of the 10. So you knew that you were probably up there. And then when we had our return from Nairobi, we had our province chapter in Brisbane, and then further elections were held of who would be the province leader, deputy and team members. And those votes were then put in a sealed envelope and sent to Rome. Rome examines what they were. And when I got a phone call from Hugh O'Neill, he said to me, "You were the clear preference of the brothers to be province leader. Do you accept that?"
Do they give reasons?
The brothers?
Yes.
Well, before the vote happens, we have great discernment and discussion. And yeah, you hear it, the good and the bad. But you don't, when the brothers vote, they just vote like electoral voting here. They don't give the reasons.
Now, in your statement, you say that the Oceania province was created in 2007.
Yes.
Was that because of dwindling numbers and it needed to be larger to make it administratively worthwhile?
Yeah, that'd be a good summary. Yes.
You were from 1996 to 2007 a member of the province leadership team for the St Patrick's province. That's
yes,
right.
correct.
And St Patrick's at the time was Victoria and Tasmania.
Correct.
The leadership team do, or what did the leadership team do when you were there?
Well, at the time when I was elected to that, I was also the director of a centre in Melbourne called Eben Rice Centre Amberley, and Well Godfrey was the provincial of the time, and he strongly encouraged me to stay at Amberley and continue that role, which I did for most of the first term of 6 years, and that means I was very part-time of the leadership team. He thought that was better for me, so I attended their weekly meetings and participated in the discussions, and I did what we call visitation of communities, and I did some visitations, but my role was somewhat limited in that first year, that first appointment.
Was the leadership team responsible in any way for professional standards, however it was described in those days?
Oh, yes, yes. And I can't kind of record, but I would say they were probably on our weekly meeting sheet.
That is a report from the director or other person in charge of professional standards that were in the areas Victoria and Tasmania?
Yes.
Was it a decision-making body in respect of matters of professional standards?
The leadership team, yes, it was.
So what matters were decided? Was it the outcome of a complaint, or was it the response of the brothers to a substantiated complaint?
Mainly that stayed with the office and what we would have received. I know the one I can remember clearly was the costs associated with defending a brother. That was one that would come to the table and would be discussed, particularly if there was an appeal.
What about the outcome for the brother after a substantiated complaint in respect of continuing in the brotherhood?
Yes, that was always raised. Not so much whether he remained in the congregation or not, I must say. What was raised and often was put in place what we called support groups, supervision groups, and at that time I was on a number of them. So we would have discussed that. Who the brother, did he require some form of supervision, were we still concerned, and the appropriate structure.
What was the process then between 1996 and 2007 to have a person dispensed from his vows or removed from the congregation?
My understanding of that would be the first stage is you would request, or the brother could request it himself, which they mainly do, is to go on a period after. If a brother is under annual profession, that means they haven't made their final vows, they can leave at any time, there's no question. If a person is finally professed, there's what we call exclaustration, which means a Latin word meaning leave from the community. So they live outside of the community for a period of time.
Is that imposed upon them, or can that be imposed upon them?
It can be, or can be strongly requested. I don't know if that can be opposed. It gets difficult if the brother doesn't want to do it.
Is there any means by which the congregation in Australia can have a person dispensing their vows or removed from congregation?
I have not known of it for the Christian Brothers. I have spoken to some other members' orders, male orders similar to ourselves, and the answer, this was only recently, and the answer I got was, he said, it's very difficult because of the requirements of canon law. But it can happen because you can give canonical warnings, and I think it's the third canonical warning, but it would need to go to the level of the congregation in Rome, and it wouldn't be supported. I would not have the authority to do that.
Has it been in your time as a Christian brother that Rome has made a decision in respect of a brother that they leave the congregation?
Not in my time as province leader, no. And in my time as a brother, I know a brother was strongly recommended to go on exclaustration. He agreed to that. That means it's a period of about 3 years. And then he was thinking of returning to the congregation, and that was not permitted. And he said, no, we want you to remain, and he was dispensed of his vows. That's the only occasion I know of.
Who was that?
Ted Dowland.
Thank you. Now, you were a novice in February 1972.
Correct.
And you were a novice for a year until which you made your first profession.
Correct.
And is it the case that you go from being a novice to a novitiate?
Now you start as a novice, and once you enter the novitiate formally, and I did that in February of 72, you are given the title of brother, but you are not under vows.
When did you take vows?
My first vows was in early 73.
In 1972, when you became a novice, and in the period of time where you were a novice until a year later, what were you told about how you were to deal with your vow of chastity and celibacy?
Yeah. The vows were treated equally as my recollection, and celibacy was given particular highlighting or emphasis. It was explained in the realm that this is our firm commitment to God, and it's our way of life, our style of living as a community member, living with others in community, and that it could be difficult at times, but my understanding and looking back was not emphasised.
Were you given any guidance as to how to manage that difficulty?
For me, those times didn't happen through my novitiate year. We're pretty energetic, and other things that took my energy. If I can move, I can know that in later years, when I was in my late 20s, it happened, when I did some theological studies and pastoral care studies. It was then that I studied like faith in the human life cycle, the stages of growth of Daniel Levinson, and a couple of other developmental psychologists, that I became in touch with my feelings of sexuality, the need for integration, the need for mature adult relationships, both male and female, if I was to be an integrated being. And I call that, in my late 20s at the Yarra Theological Union, my formation years when I look back now.
How did you integrate what you learned about adult relationships with the way in which you were living as a brother?
Just last bit again.
How did you integrate what you learned from those studies about adult relationships with how you were living as a brother?
Well, the key area that I learned, it's a kind of a saying that we've got, that you share from heart. And in our community, I lived in a very rich community setting in those years, because we're all about the same age and we're ready to learn. And we would share about our lives, our struggles. We're encouraged to have a spiritual director, which we did. Spiritual director, you shared, I call it really counselling. And I can recall bringing up those feelings of struggle at times. And at that time, as a whole area, you see your friends and my family marrying, having children. So there were some of I recall the key issues that came to me.
Brother, I mean no disrespect, but some of those listening to what you're saying probably don't really understand what it is you're saying. Now, we've spoken to some Christian brothers about their sexuality and their sexual issues through their late adolescence and into their 20s and so on. And they give us a direct picture, for example, of the thoughts that they may have had of a sexual nature.
Yeah.
Now, when you're talking about your struggles, are you talking about struggling with thoughts of a sexual or erotic nature? What are you talking about?
Well, I think, Your Honour, my struggles were around, is this going to be a life commitment? Is this a lifestyle I want to live? They were my struggles. And then I see my friends I went to school with, whom I kept in close contact with, having families, and I went to some of their weddings. So they were the concerns. So is it my lifestyle that I want to live like this? And it was around that time of final profession, taking my final vows. So they were the key areas of struggle.
Did you have any struggle with sexual thoughts?
Well, I think I'm a human man. Yes, I would have at times, yes.
Well, so when you're talking about your struggles, are you talking about those sorts of struggles?
Not really. They came for me more in my midlife, around 40, and that was when it was strongest in me, rather than at that stage.
And what are the teachings or what are the learnings of the brothers about how you deal with those sorts of issues in your personal life? Again, I stress, we've spoken already to some brothers about these issues. What's your perspective on how do you deal with those problems when you've taken the vows that you have?
Yes. Well, a key aspect, Your Honour, that I clearly remember, and it's most significant in my life. Again, I've been privileged. I was in my, as I said to you earlier, was in my midlife where the crunch really came to me, and it was a thing whether I stayed in the brothers or not, and whether it was I was offered a year in Ireland, and it was an intensive formation period, and part of that program I was offered, or you're encouraged, I should say, to take up counselling, and I took that up, and I took it up for a year, and that during that year you went to counselling weekly, and in the latter part of the year it was every fortnight. So I think I had something like nearly 30 sessions of counselling, and nothing was unturned in my life. My relationship with my family of origin, my sexual orientation, my sexuality, the energies coping with that, and my moving towards final profession, how did I cope? So there's a myriad of things, and I can remember doing quite an extensive, the therapy was in art therapy, and at the end it was just amazing. She kept all my paintings and they went around and saw a development of my life through that.
Can you capture for us the basic message as to how a brother is helped to cope with the sexuality and sexual feelings?
Yeah. Well, my first instinct, a brother has to be in touch with them, has to be aware of them rather than playing out of them. So I think that's a key thing. And another sign for me is you need quality community in which you live. And it's not, we say you can share the secrets of your heart. That is kind of a pretty good baseline of which I claim for community life. Some brothers find that very difficult, to share the secrets of their heart. And I think that's a sign of an immaturity. But in our communities today, I really encourage brothers, you must share from your heart. And if it can't share as a group, share with one-to-one. And for myself, it's been ever rich. I've taken counselling, blocks of counselling, to work through issues on a number of occasions since that Irish year. Might have been only 4 or 5 sessions, but when I see the need, I would enter into a counselling session. I have regular supervision in my role, and I have a spiritual director. So they're the kind of the checks and balances in anyone's life that's needed.
The concepts of chastity and celibacy, are they different for you?
Well, the commitment to an ideal way of life, and I understand going back to the early stages of religious life that I belong to, the monastic life, the hermits moved themselves and lived in the desert on their own, and they were chaste. So, and that's evolved into the monastic style, and now the apostolic life of religious life I live, which grew up out of the 18th century for apostolic works, has kept on that monastic style. I still see it as relevant if you live in community and are in good relationships with others. Priesthood is different.
Well then, what for you is the difference between the concept of chastity and the concept of celibacy? How should those listening to this discussion understand what you think about those two concepts?
Well, I've never put them together, Your Honour, and I don't often distinguish them. So chastity would be you live a community life, you live it faithfully, and you live it wholesomely. Celibacy, you have no sexual relationship or a one-to-one relationship with sexuality, a sexual relationship.
What do you mean a one-to-one relationship with?
Well, you can still have one-to-one relationships, I take that. It's sexualised. Maybe you have intercourse with another person.
I'm sorry?
You would have intercourse with another person, express your love for the person through sexualising that relationship.
Right. Is that the way, do you think, all Christian brothers see those concepts? Or are there different approaches?
I honestly can't answer that because I haven't honestly discussed that fully with my fellow brothers for some time. But we would talk about with each other healthy relationships and how do we relate with each other, how do we relate with the wider community, often I would say to a brother, how do you relate with women? And because we live in this male-dominated community, it's important that there's a wholesome attitude and relationship with women. And that's how we would talk sometimes with some of our men. And on committees, we try to have gender equality. And it's a new way for us to be thinking rather than have a male-dominated world.
As you know, there are many people who will suggest that the problems that this Royal Commission is concerned with have origins in the celibate life that priests and brothers are required to accept. What's your perspective on that?
I've heard those and I've read about them and I've read them. What I read, and I think, and it is my belief, that I don't believe it's solely that. It could exacerbate it if a person is not suited to the celibate way of life. It can be exacerbated. So we were told at my early years of training, and I still believe it, that there's a calling to be a brother. You have a sense of a call to be a competent brother in the charism of Edmund Rice, but there's also a call, and you have to be suited or be able to live with it, to the form of chastity. And I think it comes to me back is the ability to have mature adult relationships. So those brothers that I know that have offended, often they have shown signs of immaturity with adults. And it's only in hindsight that I can say that.
Again, there will be many people who will ask this question, so I'll ask it for them.
Sure.
If the vow of celibacy was not a requirement of a brother, would the brothers nevertheless be able to fulfil their teaching and other functions in the community? Yes,
they could. I think they'd fill their ministerial qualities and do it well. And now we as brothers, I know very few of us are in education or teaching. We are tending to broaden ourselves to the more poorer, marginalised groups within our community. But still, yes, they could do that effectively well, but it would fundamentally change the nature of living in community and the way of community life. Now, is that good or bad? Time will tell.
Well, that's assuming that change occurred. Time will only tell if change is made, won't it?
Correct, Your Honour, but what I mean by change will tame, the Christian brothers, our average age in Australia anyway is about 75. Our way of life is coming to an end. Whether I like it or not, that's the change that's moving. And that's what I mean by that. So the way young Australians do not see it as an attractive way to come, to live this life of the three vows, but we have many young adults really passionate about the justice issues we're on about, and we've got many volunteers who work with us. They're more than happy to stand beside us and call themselves Edmund Rice people, but they are not joining Christian Brothers.
So what's the planning for the future to fulfil that community need? Do you have
well, obviously, and it's happening now. We're engaging lay collaborators, volunteers, and they are doing an excellent job. As province leader, one of my joys at the moment, which I need, is to visit some of these ministries and see how productive they are as we stand in solidarity with those who are marginalised.
So is the picture that we should understand that the future will effectively be a community contribution from people of Edmund Rice, but not necessarily celibate ordained members of the order. Is that the way we should see it?
That's the way I'm seeing it, Your Honour. So some of our brothers are disappointed that that's the outcome, but I think we haven't had a novice in Australia and New Zealand who have stayed with us for over 25 years. You don't have to study the figures to know what's happening.
Yeah. And why do you think it is that young people don't offer themselves for the brotherhood?
It's a complex one, but I often talk to them about it. They admire the brothers for what we do. They often say that, but they do not see it as an option for them as a way of life. And there would be a general thinking amongst young people that I work with. For example, they wouldn't see attending Mass on Sunday as important for them, or receiving the sacraments of the Church. And in this context of the Royal Commission, they would be abhorrent to what has happened. And I know that I've spoken to groups of young people and say what has happened is awful and abhorrent, but you go by your experience of the brothers that you've had and you make your decision where you need to stand. And some have moved away from us, a lot have stayed.
I make the assumption that you cross the religious orders.
Say that again, sorry?
I make the assumption you talk across the religious orders to those who lead other orders about their future and brothers, the Morris brothers and so on, for example. Is that right?
Well, I've only been 10 months in the job and I'm just meeting these people now,
Right.
But I will be, and I have, outside of this role, I have often, and some of my best friends are in other congregations, so we do share, and there would similar, I would say, I suppose that the ones that I mix with would have similar opinions as myself.
You referred earlier to the suitability of a person to become a brother.
Yes.
Was anything done in respect of you before you took your vow to determine whether you were suitable?
Well, the only thing I can... No, not much, but I know I went to school at a Christian Brothers College in St Kilda, and the brothers there that I taught, obviously I admired, that's why I wanted to join them. They had to give witness, or I might have had to write a reference that I was suitable. I needed a reference from my parish priest at the time. I needed to submit my baptismal certificate, and I needed to have a medical. And a brother came out and had a meal with my family, and I know he had a long conversation with my father. So that's the only ones that I know at the time.
And as you say, there hasn't been a new novice for 25 years. So I take it that the process of screening is not one that you use today.
I need to not to correct that. In Oceania, we do have some novices, but they're from Papua New Guinea and from the Philippines.
How have you screened those novices?
Yes. That was one of the first tasks that I had facing me when we had novices go to Africa for their novitiate. We have the congregation worldwide has 2 novitiates, and they're both situated in Africa because that's where the majority of new members are coming from. And we requested that first of all, the young men that they'd gone to Tamale in Ghana, they had to live with the brothers community for 2 years to start with. And part of that 2 years, they did their normal work and lived with brothers. And they had what we call a mentor or a companion. And they would meet that companion every week. And then we can have a chance to see their suitability just by living with them, seeing them, and seeing if they've got a work ethic, they're serious about being a brother. And then once they get to that level, we would call them a postulant. That means it's getting a bit more serious. And then towards the end of the postulancy period, which can vary from 1 to 2 years, we would have a psychological test. And I can't name the one, but I know it was in Cebu in the Philippines. They went to a psychologist. The testing was done. And then they take that testing to the director of novices in Tamale. I asked to see the document, and it's up to the individual novice, is our protocol at the moment, whether he does, but other in the Philippines saw it and read it.
What are the instructions to the psychologist as to what to test for?
I know that I don't know to answer that question. I don't know the instructions other than that it's a set program for those entering religious life of their suitability.
Well, what's the criteria for suitability?
Suitability would be, as from I've explained, that the suitability would be that they can live in community life, they have a suitable attitude towards ministry. Another one that we're learning is that they've got family, usually people that join us in these countries are dependent upon supporting their families, so that's always problematic if they join us. So if their families need them to physically support them, we encourage them to go and support their families.
Is the psychologist who does the testing a member of a religious order or clergy?
I'm not aware of that at this stage.
So you don't know one way or the other?
I know one was and one wasn't, so I'm not sure about where our person went to in Cebu in the Philippines, but I could certainly find that out.
Do you accept that in order to use the results of psychological testing to either determine or become part of a suitability program, that you would want to understand what they were testing for?
It would be important. My understanding that the psychological assessment report, they take it with them, and the Director of Novices would then meet with the prospective novice, and that would be part of their weekly meeting that they have in the novitiate. So that's how the tool is used. My understanding at this stage is that the psychological testing, unless it was something very fundamentally wrong, doesn't exclude from that novitiate. So I know that the 3 that went from the Philippines this year, we got notification only last week that 1 is returning. And I've been in touch with the Director of Novices while I've been here in Ballarat to discuss that.
What, returning where?
To the Philippines, returning home. So he's left the novitiate. They've only been there since February of this year, and he is returning. And it just hasn't worked out.
You understand that in each state and territory in Australia, there's a process whereby those who work with children are required to undergo a working with children check?
I am.
And at least in respect of some religious and some clergy, they are required to undergo that check if they're working with children.
Correct.
What do you do in respect of those novices or members of the order within your province who work outside of Australia?
Who, sorry?
Who work outside of Australia,
yes.
To determine that they are suitable by reference to the criteria that's used in Australia to gain a working with children check?
Yes, in some of the countries, of course, they're not as developed as Australia. I think of both the Philippines, Timor-Leste and Papua New Guinea. Now, I know that we have engaged Dr. Pauline Mamaduma, and she is an expert in the child protection area, and she has been to 3 of those countries and put in process, or I must say it's an ongoing process, of those protocols. And they are strict protocols in the way of child protection, and they are including the brothers community, the brothers involved, volunteers and any staff that we may employ.
What is the content of those strict protocols?
What is the
content of them? To say it's a strict protocol is a description of your view of them. It doesn't tell us what actually is involved in it.
Right. Well, when I say strict protocols, that can be unpacked at various levels, I admit that. I know I'll take, we call it Communicate Ebb and Rise in Timor-Leste. So it was at my direction because we knew that where the brother's house was living was surrounded by a pigsty and families and children, and we thought it wasn't suitable. So we've asked Pauline to go and inspect that house and give us a full report of whether it's a suitable place for brothers to live, and particularly with a focus on regard to child protection.
Is there any requirement or obligation imposed for a criminal record check to be undertaken of anyone who is moving from the novitiate further in the order?
From the African novitiate, I'm not
Outside of Australia.
outside Australia. I'm not aware of that.
I understand you've provided us with various documents in respect of this statement and earlier, brother. Have you provided us with the detail of the child protection protocols that you've referred to in your evidence?
They are still in, that part of them would be there, yes, but the ones that I'm referring to in Timor-Leste, they would still be in draft, and no, I'm pretty sure we haven't.
Can I ask you to provide those that are in draft and indicate, when you provide them, the stage of the process from becoming draft to final documents?
Certainly can. I know my colleagues here will take note of that, and they will be certainly followed up.
Thank you. Now, when you were a novice, were you made aware of the rules for the to student contact?
Yes, we were.
So these are the 1932 rules I'm referring to.
Oh, a bit before my time, yes.
But the 1932 rules were not made known to you?
Well, I would never refer to as the 1932 rules, but we were referred, I clearly remember, you were never with a child alone, and you never over noli me tangere, I think it was the Latin we used to say, do not touch.
Well, let me...
You refresh me, yes.
Indicate what the clauses are. Servants, male or female, or boys of a residential school must not be permitted to enter a brother's room. Now, was that told to you when you were a novice?
Yes.
Unless duty or necessity require it, a brother must never be alone with a pupil. The brothers should avoid taking a pupil by the hand, touch the face, or otherwise fondling him. Were you told of that?
Yes.
Whilst they should cherish a tender affection for all their pupils, especially the poorest, out of love for our Lord Jesus Christ, whom they most closely resemble, they shall not manifest a particular friendship or inclination for certain pupils, for such affections are most dangerous snares of the devil and might easily be followed by fatal consequences, which would bring dishonour on religion and even render the guilty one liable to severe penalties under the civil law?
Well, the latter part of that was not familiar to me, but I know we were always told you never have favourites, you treat every student the same.
And you were told that when you joined the novitiate?
Yeah, I do remember that, because even though it's over 40 years ago, we used to take catechetic classes at the local parish of a Sunday morning once a month, and they were outlined to us very clearly. And I can remember the assistant novice master bringing us in and really berating us because he heard a novice swear, and then reiterated our professional stance when we go to catechetics. And those other items were mentioned to us, yes.
And do you understand that those matters were matters that would have been raised with novitiates in the decade before your time?
I don't know. I know that my novitiate they were just on the turn. I had a very benevolent, compassionate novice master who I lived with a number of times, so I don't know that. I know that some novitiate masters beforehand, according to the folklore of the brothers, were harsh. So were they told then? I would assume so, but I haven't got no evidence for that.
And your assumption would be partly based on the fact that these rules had been in place for some decades?
Oh, yes, they should have. If they weren't, they should have, yes.
Now, have you had the opportunity to read the Royal Commission's report on the Christian brothers in Western Australia, what we call Case Study 11?
I've read parts of it, yes.
You'll understand from that report that it was found that the first conviction of a brother for what I'll broadly describe as child sexual assault offences was in 1919.
I thought it was in the 30s, but I take it if that's correct, yes.
And then thereafter, every decade until the 60s, there was one or more complaint of child sexual abuse that the relevant province leadership were aware of? You understand that from the report?
Could you just repeat that, please?
Certainly. That in every decade after the 1919 conviction until the 60s, there was one or more complaints of child sexual abuse that the relevant province leadership were aware of?
Well, I don't know that. I don't know those facts, but if you say it and it's written there, yeah, I'd have to.
You're not aware of that from that report?
Well, I didn't study it in that detail, no.
You accept it?
I can accept what you're saying.
When was it that you first came to understand that there were an increasing number of complaints of child sexual abuse against members of your order?
I've got the clear recollection, the date is a bit furry, but I'd say it was around the early 1990s, about 93. And I was in Melbourne at the time, seeing the notifications that became very, very public, front pages of newspapers, and it was just so obvious. So
it didn't come to your attention as a member of the order, it came to your attention through reading the media? That'd
be correct. Or the starkness of it and the numeral, the number, yeah.
From 93 to 1999, you were the director of the Edmund Rice Centre?
Correct.
In Amberley. And you say in your statement that you oversaw the day-to-day operations of the centre as well as running a number of retreats for students and adults of Catholic secondary schools?
Correct.
So that was the position you held when you first became aware through the media of increasing number of complaints against members of your order?
Correct.
What did you do with that knowledge in respect of your then position?
We spoke to the staff. We had a small staff there, and there was a set of volunteers that would assist us, and I spoke to them.
Say to them?
Well, I asked them what had they read. This is, I can go back to the staff. I remember clearly of talking to them, and I said, have you got any questions you want to ask of me about what is in the media? And there was a fellow there who was our gardener, and he had gone through the Anglican care homes, and he spoke at length about it and his treatment and how he found it. And then others didn't, they were a bit shell-shocked. And I said, well, we'll need to follow this up. So that was with some of the staff, and I spoke with some staff individually. With the volunteers, we came them together, and I had a similar process with them, and that happened on a number of occasions. And I said, if you're feeling uneasy about this, you need to share it with somebody or remove yourself.
What did you do to understand what was behind what you were reading in the media in terms of the order?
Yes. Well, I can tell you at the time I was shell-shocked too and stunned. But I remember at the time, it was around this time, because Paul Noonan was, it was Paul, who was the provincial of the time, and he came to me and he came out there and discussed matters with me of this nature, and he asked me would I go on with a Compass program on the ABC. And I've forgotten the name of the interviewer now, but it's a long time ago.
Might have been Geraldine Doog in those days.
No, it wasn't. It was a male man. Anyway, I went on that program, and I know that Paul and the other brother that was with me, we had a lot of conversations about that.
But in order to go on that program, brother, surely you must have learned, other than from the media, what in fact was behind these charges that were referred to in the media. Yeah,
I started to talk it about, particularly with Paul Noonan, and the culture within the brothers that allowed this to happen, and the scandal that it was. Unfortunately, at the time, it may not have been as victim-focused as it is today.
Well, just leaving aside the victim focus, wouldn't you have wanted to know where those individuals who referred to in the media had worked as a Christian brother, what the structure was, what was known about them at the time, who else was there who may well have known about it? Wouldn't you have wanted to know all of those things?
Well, I can't recall answering those questions.
Well, did you ask them?
No, I don't think I did.
Brother, as you probably know, the evidence that we have received, not only in relation to brothers who have committed criminal offences, but others, that it's not uncommon to find that the abuse of the child is both sexual and physical.
Yes.
Very considerable violence is visited upon children. Now, I assume you've reflected upon that behaviour by members of the Christian Brothers. Can you tell us why it happened? What was in the culture that allowed this to happen?
It's a question, Your Honour, that I've asked even very recent times, as well as back in the 1990s. And there's a recent conversation that I had with a very elderly brother in Brisbane, an 88-year-old, he'd probably be listening. And he had a very good insight. He said, we lost our way. We lost the charism of Edmund Rice. And we came to see reputation of our schools and institutions as number one rather than the service of children. And that physical violence, physical corporal punishment as we softly called it, but it was violence, became nearly a common practice. Some, as I only heard during this week, were just beyond any realm of punishment. It was just brutality. Now, that may have been the exception, but the corporal punishment, the use of the strap, was seen as a common way of maintaining discipline within your class. And that became accepted, where I think that was fatally wrong. It should never have become accepted. And this elderly brother would say, we moved away, we lost sight of whom Edmund Rice, a man of compassion, particularly those who are marginalised. Yeah, that's as best I can answer at this stage.
We've also learned that the place of the brother or the priest in society was an exalted position. You accept that?
I do.
And that brought power both over children but also more generally in the community, so that adults wouldn't believe complaint by children that a priest or brother had abused.
There's a warped sense of power, but that is true.
Now, from your perception, is that a cultural issue for the whole church in Australia?
From my understanding, I can talk for the Christian Brothers, it certainly was. And I'd say for the church generally, it is an issue that needs to be ongoingly addressed. And in pockets of our church, my observation, it's been addressed well, and I suppose it's always ongoing.
So you're saying to us that the same problem will be found in parts of the church in Australia today?
I think, yes.
And do you accept that that carries with it the similar risks that manifested themselves in the Christian Brothers? That is, the power will be abused.
I'd say it's far less than it was, but that's always the possibility. And for me, abuse doesn't always have to be that sexual abuse we've heard. It can be in various forms of abuse that I have seen, bullying, emotional, other forms of abuse as well. So my belief is that we need to always be in touch with leadership and how it's exercised. I mean, I see that in myself. And I would see leadership within our church needs to be pastoral and it needs to be collaborative. So I struggle with being called province leader. I much prefer to be a member of the province leadership team. And when we have meetings, that's how we operate.
Brother Clinch, just following that line of questioning, in both case study 11 and this case study, we have heard accounts of very cruel and often unlawful treatment of children. And your explanation from the brother you spoke to that men lost their way implies good men who otherwise failed to fulfil their duty. It seems, however, to exhibit men who are unsuited for a Christian mission. Do you have anything to say about whether there is a pathology exhibited before us with respect to the particular men who have been the subject of victims and survivors' accounts?
I can say there is a pathology. They are very sick men, and I'd say the environment in which they were living exacerbated that sickness
Would you describe them as unchristian?
Well, certainly their actions are totally unchristian and abhorrent to me, and abhorrent to the gospel and abhorrent to the charism of Edmund Rice.
What was the environment you're referring to?
Say that again, please.
You say that the environment in which they were living exacerbated the sickness. What do you mean by the environment in which they were living?
Well, there were cases, and I just give, it's a balance. I know that when I was at school, as I said, I found the brothers very warm and attractive, and they were good to me. And that was the impression I had of them. But when I joined the congregation at an earlier age, I can recall communities that I would find cold, brothers living isolated. That means by isolated they were not able to engage well with others. They were secretive. And I just found, what happiness did they have in life? That was the impression I had.
So by environment, you don't mean the physical environment they were living in, you mean their emotional position?
I would mean both, because some of the physical housing that brothers lived in were very primitive, very scarce even for the age they were living.
Did you become aware of the lack of privacy for children in the dormitories and other places they were living in areas controlled by the brothers?
I can rarely say that I'd visited any of those. I must say I've never myself been in a boarding school. I can remember people describing their times in boarding school as being that. The big dormitories, I've seen photos of them, and the open cubicles for showering, and that, I'd say it was I find it hard to know whether it was the norm of the day and other private schools was the same, but just taking it, the ones I know, I would hate to live in that situation myself. I couldn't. Thank God I never went to boarding school.
You've given evidence about what you describe as this corporal punishment or simply brutality. You were a teacher in 1975 at Aquinas College in Ringwood.
Yes.
Was there corporal punishment and the use of straps then?
Yes.
And you used them?
Yes. I can clearly remember the first time I gave the strap to a lad, and it was an awful experience for me.
When did the common use of straps stop?
I can remember it being when I was teaching at the time at St Virgil's College, Hobart, and I went there in 85, and then the principal of the time said it was no longer to be used. I think it may have been earlier in some cases, but that's when I personally knew that it did, and I hadn't used the strap then for probably a decade. I had stopped using it well before then myself, but that's the earliest time I can recall when it was a kind of a public proclamation. And I can remember now seeing a staff member using the corporal punishment, and I reported it to the principal of the time. So that's why it's still fairly strong in my memory.
You would have heard evidence over the last week from men about when they were boys, they would be dealt with brutally, and then the brother would seek to comfort them after the brutality that the brother had inflicted, and then sexually abuse them.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Now, is that something that you see as being permitted in a culture where there is such brutality?
Oh, I would never, ever permit it. No, it's something abhorrent. And
Well, leaving aside the abhorrent nature of it, which I think no one will disagree with you, brother, do you see any connection between the two?
I see connection between the brutality and the sexual abuse, yes.
What's the connection?
Well, something about gratification and power, that's how I see it. I wouldn't be a psychological expert in that, but I know that where there is dominance and power, there seems to be a freedom to think you can do what you like.
And in your time at St Aquinas, when the strap was in use, was there also that power and dominance in addition to the use of corporal punishment?
I didn't notice it. I think it was, as I said earlier, in the 70s there was starting to be a change. The principal of the day was a good man. I was pastoral. I was my first year teaching, I think, and I had a class of, I think it was well and over the 40s. I taught most of the day. Classroom management was a struggle for me.
And it was a day school?
It was a day school.
In the school that you taught in 75, were the classrooms such as they could be seen from outside?
Yes.
There weren't frosted windows and the like?
No, I can remember the big pane of wind glass in the door. That's, yeah.
Just turning back to your statement, you refer in paragraph 21 to there being secondary schools that the Christian Brothers have a role in Victoria. Do you see that?
So I just got it there now. Say that again for me.
You set out there the schools,
yes,
the secondary schools that the Christian Brothers have a role in Victoria. Do you see that?
I do.
You don't have a role in any primary schools anymore?
Correct.
Is that because of the lack
Sorry, St Kevin's does as a primary school, but we wouldn't have a direct involvement now with St Kevin's or any of those schools.
Is that because of the lack
Sorry, St Kevin's does as a primary school, but we wouldn't have a direct connected with the Christian Brothers.
So is it the case that no Christian Brothers teach in any school in Victoria?
There's only, yeah, correct, no teacher. I think we've said in our statement that there's one brother who is principal at Paray College, Bundoora.
Did that come about because of the reduction in numbers of brothers?
Yeah, well, as it turns out, I'm in one of the youngest myself. So, yeah, there's just... I got a request recently, would we have a brother to help out in the Northern Territory as an emergency principal? Well, I didn't have to think. I just had to write the letter back and say, no, we don't.
Because there was no one available?
Or nobody capable of doing it of the age bracket.
By the early to mid-90s, when it was become known the horrendous nature of the abuse earlier, was that a factor that was taken into account in considering whether the Christian Brothers would continue to have a role, particularly in primary schools?
I can't answer that. I don't know the reason at that stage.
Now, over to page 28. You note there that St Olympia's Boys' School...
This is number 28, is it?
Paragraph 28. It'll be on your screen shortly.
Yeah, yes.
And you say there that that school was established by the Christian Brothers in 88 and operated till 1976 when it was closed. Can you help us with why it was closed?
No, I can't, because I certainly haven't been privy to that information. I could only assume that the benefit of amalgamations was seen as a better way to operate schools.
Thank you. Now, turning over to paragraph 35 of your statement, you refer there to the Christian Brothers Professional Standards Office and the name of the executive officer, Shane Wall. What were or are Mr Wall's qualifications?
Shane's qualifications. I don't know his qualifications, knowing that he has been a counsellor, a mediator, had worked at St Bernard's College, Essendon, in the counselling area. And I know that that's my best knowledge. Shane was then, at times, we referred people, brothers and others, to him for counselling. So Shane's had a good relationship with the Christian Brothers for some time.
He is not himself a Christian brother.
No, he's a married man with a family.
but he worships, if I can use that language, with the Christian Brothers?
I don't think he does. I'm not aware of if he does. He doesn't do it with me, no.
Thank you. Now, in paragraph 36, you say that you have a monthly video conference with Mr Wall and he provides a detailed report of any significant developments in professional standards matters. Can you help us with what you would consider to be a significant development that you'd be told of?
Shane would give us briefing notes of what had happened in the previous month. And for example, we've had a lot of settlement cases, re-examinations in Perth, and he will give us an update on those. What the mediation happened, what was the outcome, we would know that. And if there was any pending criminal charges against a brother, which has happened in recent times, we would be informed of that and any upgrade or process of what was happening.
Did the leadership team have any decision-making role in respect of professional standards matters?
We certainly do.
What areas come to you for decision?
I know that if there's a mediation and there's an amount of money that's to be paid, up to a certain amount, if it's more than 200,000, it needs to go through one of the leadership for endorsement. So
anything under 200,000, who has the delegation to accept that offer or
we
that
have,
settlement?
Yeah, well, the province, the Professional Standards Office would have, we have arranged if there's a status where we are happy with their conduct, and that's audited and would go for the Professional Standards Consultative Group as well, and we are satisfied that they have the ability to be able to authorise that.
I take it that the vast majority of settlements you enter into are beneath $200,000?
Would be less than that.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I would get a list every month and I would see who they are, and I have asked questions, why would you think that amount and not that amount? So we're open to ask about particular cases if we wish.
And I presume you get written reports from the Professional Standards Office in those meetings?
We get
written reports, they're not oral reports?
No, we would get both. Particularly with the video conference from Shane and the leadership team, the minutes, we would have our secretary there, our minutes secretary would take minutes of the conversation. They're not as inclusive or as extensive as the Professional Standards Consultative Committee. We would have documentation as well. So they're two separate means in which I have to be in touch with what's happening.
The Professional Standards Consultative Committee comprises who?
Well, the chair of it is former Judge David Jones. We have Angela Ryan. We have Professor Gabriel McMullen. We have Mr Ron Farrell. They are the four externalised people that come to assist us. Brother John Webb, who's on the provincial leadership team, he would be the official liaison person with that group. I attend meetings as often as I can, which is reasonably frequently. And we'd have Brother Brian Brandon at the moment would be part of that team, and sometimes another staff member from the office, Shane Wall as well.
How does the structure work with the leadership team having the role you've described, there being the Professional Standards Office who report regularly to the team, and the Professional Standards Consultative Committee?
Well, that's where it's definitely called a consultative committee. And David Jones is very good. He will look at me and say, brother, we have to have this endorsed. So, like we've had a number of recent policies that have been developed by the committee, they would then go to the leadership team for endorsement or for modification as we would see fit.
Does the consultative committee have any decision-making role in respect of settlements?
No, they do not. They have recommendations only. Or they may take it, may review it and help us review what is happening.
So they receive the same reports that the leadership team receives?
They basically do, yes. Shane would be at both meetings.
And they would have a role of recommending or advising to the leadership team or Mr Wall how a particular settlement should be structured?
I can't recall that happening, how their settlements would be structured, but they certainly have been most helpful in preparing like the principles, guiding principles that we have developed. Now that was David Jones, a lot of work from him. And so they have a great influence in the development of policies and protocols. That's how I would see it at this stage.
Now, you deal with the responses of the Christian Brothers at paragraph 42, and thereafter, if we could just have that on the screen. And at 43, you describe the several elements of the response. The third one is provision of counselling and other support for victims. Now, do you provide that directly, or do you provide it through an agency such as CASA?
I don't think we do it directly. It may be a number of counsellors that it's up to the individual who wants to approach, but I gather that the counselling fees, if they're to be paid by the congregation, that would be known to the Professional Standards Office. And I know here in Ballarat we've been very happy with the partnership that's developing and ongoing with CASA.
So it's not the case that the order engages or employs counsellors?
Not that I'm aware of.
So when you say the provision of counselling services, that's giving the names of counsellors external to the order for people to choose to attend or not?
I'm not sure of the direct procedure, but we certainly don't employ counsellors. The province doesn't. So they'll be external. The process of which counsellor sees whom, I'm not sure. I'd have to check that.
You would expect that the bills would be sent back to you to pay of those counselling sessions?
I know that happens, yes.
Do you know whether the order imposes any limits on the number or type of counselling that you provide to victims as they're described here?
I know that there has been some limits placed. I've heard of sometimes 5 sessions and 10 sessions, and we're starting to realise, and I only heard evidence yesterday, that it may be years of work that's required.
When you say you're starting to realise and heard evidence yesterday, is that the first time it's become clear to you that survivors of child sexual abuse at the hands of religious suffer for decades?
I knew that they would suffer. It's lifelong suffering. I would have known that. But it certainly highlighted the need for ongoing counselling needs of survivors and victims, yes. So it highlighted it rather than it was new for me.
The Royal Commission has heard evidence from Ms Lockhart at CASA that she has an arrangement with Mr Wall whereby she has a pre-approved treatment plan for various individuals that she puts forward, and that pre-approval has a period of 3 months.
Yes.
Did you hear that evidence? Or was
I
that
did
brought to
hear
your
that,
attention?
yes. I did hear that.
What do you think of that as a system for providing assistance? Again, I'm referring to paragraph 43C of your statement.
I think a process has to be put in place. Our relationship with CASA and with the diocese in this matter is new. It's relatively young, and we're learning as we go. And I'd be more than open myself, and I would recommend that to our Professional Standards Office, that we be open for good dialogue with CASA and receive advice from them. So after extending that 3-month period and making it a better, more streamlined process, I would support that. Whatever is better for the victim, we have to continually remind myself and us that we have to continually review, reflect upon the processes that are already there and can they be better. We want best practice in whatever we do, and I'm certainly open to dialogue, conversation to receive that best practice.
Brother, what about financing all of this? Does the Brotherhood have assets sufficient to ensure ongoing capacity to fund what people need who've been abused by brothers?
It's my understanding that we would have assets at this stage for ongoing, yes.
We've heard in diocesan arrangements of the problem of assets being tied up in trusts and not accessible. Is that the position with the Brotherhood, or how are the assets held?
I'm not aware of that, Your Honour. I'm fairly certain that I would be aware of that. Again, I would delegate that to our Province Bursar and our Investment Committee, but the information I have that money has been available, and we have downloaded, I know, some monies recently to meet the settlement payments that are going at a rapid pace in Perth this year. So I would not be putting the brakes on that, and I've written letters to our brothers saying that we will have to change how we operate in order for that to happen.
Do you have a similar relationship to the one in Ballarat with CASA, with other agencies outside Ballarat of a nature similar to CASA?
The one that I do know of is a place called Tuart Place in Perth, in Fremantle, and it's my understanding that we actually own the property there, and we make a sizable donation to Tuart Place each year to allow them. That's a place where survivors and victims can come for counselling and just to hang out, have a meal. And I was in Perth only recently, and that relationship is going well.
You're not aware of any other location where such a relationship operates?
No, I'm not.
Is it the case that Ballarat and Western Australia have become your most structured area of claims being received? That is, that you've put in place structures in those two areas because of the number of claims?
Oh, I could agree with that. I'm not quite sure of the answer, but that would seem quite logical, yes.
Do you know of any other geographic areas other than WA and Ballarat where there's been significant numbers of claims?
Well, I'm aware of Melbourne, which is my hometown. There's been a number of claims, and I know just from my recent times would be Goulburn in Western New South Wales has been another area, and there is a scattering in Sydney. I don't think in Queensland itself, I don't know of any focused area that I've heard of or aware of.
Is it the case that the counselling you fund is counselling for secondary victims as well as just the primary survivors?
Yeah, I'm pleased you asked me that question, because that's one of the times that I've with a victim in Melbourne ongoingly, and he'll be listening to this by stream, so it's just to acknowledge him, the pain that he's going through, and he'll know that. And he's often said, "What about my wife?" And I've met with her, and it's very sad for me each time I visit, but he's most welcoming, and he's a good man, and he'll get there. But a man of 65, and it did not come out for him until the last 10 years, and it's rocked his family. And I've sat with them and I've cried with them. And if I can help them in any way, whether it be primary or secondary victim, that is my hope.
Well, it may be your hope, brother, but is it the case?
Oh, no, that's a weak word. It's my conviction.
No, not suggesting that it's a weak or strong word. Yeah. The question was whether or not the order has as a principle or not funding secondary victims.
No, we have funded secondary victims already. So I would encourage that we develop that and have a process and where that is allowed to happen.
Thank you. Now, just turning to claims, if I can turn firstly to paragraph 64 of your statement, which will be on the screen shortly. You refer there to having reached financial settlements with 42 victims in the Diocese of Ballarat, either as part of Towards Healing or through some other way. Are you able to tell us over what period of time those settlements have been reached?
No, I wouldn't know that, but I could find out. I don't know that fact.
Are you able to tell us over what period of time the abuse, the subject of those claims, took place?
No, I don't know that fact.
You don't know who were the perpetrators of the crimes, the subject of these claims?
I would have particularly after this week, I'd have a very good idea.
Perhaps you could provide us with that information in due course.
Could you just explain what information you're seeking?
It's the information I've just sought. The period of time of the claims, the period of time of the abuse, the subject of the claims, and who were the perpetrators.
Yeah, my team would be hearing of that, and we will do that.
Thank you. Now, the total of those payments was just short of $3 million?
That's correct.
With an average payment of about $70,000?
Correct.
Now, with the claims that were settled outside of Towards Healing, that is those people who came directly to you or through lawyers, are you able to say whether the settlement reached was on average greater than that under Towards Healing?
I cannot answer that again. I wouldn't be aware of that fact.
Perhaps if that can be communicated.
Yeah, if we could take note of that, yes.
Thank you. Now, those claims, or the settlements that you refer to, are those settlements including matters in which Catholic Church Insurance were involved?
I would assume there will be some involvement of the insurance company, but I can only assume that. I haven't seen the breakup of how it was made. I just know as a general concept that sometimes there is Catholic insurance involvement, as well as ourselves, with monies involved.
Perhaps you can confirm that those two paragraphs of your statement are in relation to matters in which CCI had an involvement, as well as they didn't have an involvement because the money came from the Christian Brothers.
I could ask our team to do that, yes.
Thank you. Now, turning over to paragraph 73, you refer there to the re-examination of claims. Now, did that re-examination come about following the case study 11 that the Royal Commission did in Western Australia?
Again, for my limited time as this position, I haven't got those facts with me.
You don't know when it was that the Christian Brothers began re-examining claims in the Diocese of Ballarat?
No, I don't.
Okay, you could
Another
also
one to
tell us
find out,
that.
yes.
Now, you say that so far 11 claims have been re-examined and additional payments made. Do you see that in your statement? What's the process by which the re-examination takes place?
Well, it's my understanding, and again, it's just what I've heard, I can't isolate or turn down, that we now strongly encourage, if a person comes forward from experience, that they have legal representation when they come. We would have legal representation, and we certainly base it on the guiding principles we have in place now when we deal with this.
Sorry, you mean the guiding principles for civil claims?
Yes, yes, it is produced by our consultative committee and monitored as well. And we would then hopefully go through a non-adversarial process.
Essentially a mediation between lawyers.
That's correct. And with, well, the one, I've been at one where I was present for part of it. So there are some of our people, the victims, survivors, that would like an apology, and we would do that. Some would like a brother to do that apology, and we would arrange that as well.
It sounds somewhat akin to some of the Towards Healing processes, brother.
Oh, yeah, it would be. I'd say it's... Well, we have the people that approach us, the victims that approach us in any way, we would always be encouraging to give an options, and particularly if they've got legal representation, we now find that's better, that their legal representation can help them make that appropriate decision, which way they would like to go.
Is there any criteria given to the lawyers as to the way in which they should consider a range of payments in the re-examination process?
Yes, there are, and those guiding principles for civil claims that was produced by the consultative committee, that is also been handed to our lawyers, and that's our instruction, that it is not to be adversarial, it is to be victim orientated, and it is to show a sense of compassion and dignity for the person that approaches us.
What about in more hard financial terms?
Sorry,
in hard financial terms,
yes.
Is there any range that's indicative? Any limit set? Those sort of things?
Well, I can only go by the facts from this one, that the average, say, was 70,000, and when they were re-examined, it went to 92. No, that's all I can say on that area, but I know Shane and the Professional Standards Office, they would look at the situation beforehand, they would discuss it amongst their team, and if it's a dubious one, they may take it to the consultative committee to work out what they think would be an appropriate range to start at least a negotiation with.
Do you know whether, what is usually referred to as the common law principles of compensation in a civil world apply?
I've heard of it, but unfortunately my legal understanding would not allow me that.
So do you know whether compensation for lost income is considered?
I'm not aware of that.
To your understanding, is the amount based on what I can call pain and suffering?
Would certainly be involved in it.
Including expenses that might have been occurred as a result of the abuse, medical and the like?
Well, I know that has happened, yes.
And the process is open for a particular point of time or ongoing for people to come and seek a re-examination of the amounts they've been given?
Yeah. Well, I know it's open, and whether we like it or not, I'm open to that, that if a person wants to come forward, it has to be their time where they feel comfortable, and the invitation is always there for them to come forward.
Is there a budget that your province has in mind or imposed in respect of these payments?
We certainly haven't imposed anything, because this year it's gone 5 times from what it was. And that's our struggle, I mentioned to His Honour, of finding that money, and we just haven't got it in cash. So we are trying to realise that now.
You referred before to having downloaded some money. I wasn't sure what that meant.
Well, my understanding, again, not a financier, that we would have some form of investment portfolio, and we had to make the best arrangement how to find cash rather than just leave it in the portfolio. So realise some of those investments, how we could pay these claims.
Would any of those investments be in property? Be in property?
I know that some property has been sold, yes.
And is it the case that the property that has been sold is property that's held in relation to the diocese or the area within which the claims arose, or more generally? No,
generally. Our finances are certainly Oceania-wide, so from the Philippines to Perth.
Now, one issue that you may have heard that has arisen in the evidence this week is that after a settlement has been arrived at, the person received no further contact from the Christian brothers to see how he was going.
What was the question?
You've heard that evidence?
I have, I did.
Is there any structure in place whereby your professional standards people organise a follow-up with the person who's received a settlement?
I've had a conversation with the Professional Standards Office on that, and I would say, from my observation over recent months, that that is something that we need to improve on, and I would be committed to that. So I've had an initial conversation with the Professional Standards Office, not in trying to find an excuse, but they have been inundated with claims, particularly from Perth, and I would not expect that office to do it. I think it's something that we as a leadership team have discussed, and we have determined that we need a ministry, whether that's a good or bad word, of healing and reconciliation. And that's where we as a team, leadership team, saying we will take that on ourselves. And that may mean, and I think it will mean, we'll need to engage other people to assist us in the ministry of healing and reconciliation, particularly of those people that have been abused within our institutions of the past.
Is it the case that there's only one professional standards office for the whole of the province?
Correct. We decided, since my time in office, we've had an internal review of the office, and there were some very good recommendations given to the team, our leadership team. And one was that we would open an office, say, in Perth, but we've decided no, that there's one office is best for centralisation of records and accounting procedures, but we would have asked a brother in Perth that forego of his present ministry and take up this area of meeting with victims, which he's got a very good relationship with some, working with to a place as a full-time basis. I have asked 5 brothers to undergo training, professional training in this area, and that is in progress, and I would see them. And maybe I think what needs to happen, and again it's just my thought bubble at the moment, but it's something that I would be working towards, that we may need to engage a professional person in this area, and probably more preferably a woman in that area.
When you say in this area, that is to deal with survivors rather than necessarily to train your people?
Exactly. Or might do a bit of both, but I'd say the area that I see is unmet need at the moment is to have good pastoral care for those victims who want it. I'm very aware that I was at a mediation or a conference only this Monday before I came here, and the person that I met with to offer an apology, he just put, I said, I don't want your apology. I don't want to see you again. Just help me get this over with and I want to move on with my life. And that was very difficult for me to sit through, but I've learnt that I need to deeply listen to the people, the victims that come to us. Now, he wanted compensation, and that's all he wanted really, to get on with his young family and not to see a Christian brother again.
Have you given consideration to having a brother do a similar position here in Ballarat as to the one in Perth?
Yes, certainly.
How's that advanced?
It hasn't advanced greatly, but I think you can read in my statement, because of the diversity of Oceania, this is probably the first time I've had a lengthy period in Ballarat, and I'm very much more aware of the seriousness and the need here in Ballarat, and it would be a priority in my life and the leadership team's life to meet some of the needs where we can and where we're invited into.
Do you require deeds of release to be signed by those who receive a sum of money?
We ask for a deed of release where it's required, but we wouldn't stand on that, and we certainly don't have confidentiality agreements anymore.
So the deed of release is confined to making further claims, not that you can't talk about what happened?
Our hope would be for the healing process to happen, that we can come to a reasonable agreement at this re-examination. But if it comes to a third re-examination, well, we won't be putting our hand up to go away. Our response has to be compassionate, open, and at least ready to listen to what people have to tell us.
But the Christian Brothers is insured by Catholic Church Insurance, isn't that right?
We were, my understanding was, and so claims in that time of insurance period would still be covered, and we still work with CCI on some elements, yes.
Does CCI require you to enter into a deed in order to provide the funds?
A deed of release, you mean?
Yes.
I'm not aware of that CCI that asked for that. I know that the practice does happen in some times. Whether that's a direction from CCI, I don't know.
I note the time, Your Honour.
Yes, just before we adjourn, brother, I think you told us you've been a Christian brother for more than 40 years, is that correct? Now, you know, of course, because we've talked about it in public hearings, of these significant issues that have emerged in the Christian Brothers in relation to the abuse of children. When did you first start to realise that there might be a problem in the brotherhood?
As I mentioned earlier, Your Honour, the first time that I felt a deep sense of shame and really rocked my own belief in being a brother was in that early 90s time, when it became so publicly acknowledged of the failures of some of our members.
Well, that's the public acknowledgement, but what about within the brotherhood? When did you even start to think there might be a problem?
Yeah, I think it was around that time, because previously to the public shamefulness of ourselves, I really wasn't aware of the seriousness of anybody really in this area of abuse. I can say that.
Well, you know, of course, now that there were a number of your members who were abusing.
I do know that now.
And abusing at times that you were in the brotherhood.
Correct.
And you say that you didn't have any idea.
Well, I joined the Brothers in 72 and finished my training around First Mission. Teaching assignment was 75. And I wouldn't have heard a slightest thing in those times, no.
We'll take the short adjournment.
All stand.